This difficulty fitting in often comes from heightened awareness rather than lack of social ability. Some minds register context more intensely. Tone shifts, group dynamics, unspoken expectations, all of it is noticed. While others respond automatically, this awareness slows participation. The person isn't unsure of what to do, they are aware of too many ways it could be done. From a psychological perspective, fitting in depends on implicit alignment. Most social behavior runs on patterns learned early and reinforced unconsciously. When those patterns don't fully internalize, interaction becomes deliberate. Responses are considered while the moment is still unfolding. The body participates, but the mind stays one step back, evaluating. Behaviorally, this creates a subtle gap. The person adapts, but with effort. They mirror language, adjust posture, calibrate responses. Nothing looks wrong externally. Internally, however, there is constant micro-correction. Presence is split between being there and managing how one is there. Over time, this reinforces the sense of not quite belonging. Not because rejection occurred, but because full immersion never happens. The person is included, yet doesn't feel integrated, accepted, yet not anchored. And because the adjustment is invisible, it's easy to assume the problem is internal rather than contextual. The question quietly shifts, not how do I fit in, but why does fitting in require so much awareness in the first place? There is a moment when this sense of not fitting becomes more pronounced. It usually appears after sustained exposure. At first, everything feels manageable. The person engages, responds, stays present. But as time passes, a quiet fatigue builds. Not from people themselves, but from the ongoing effort to stay aligned. The mind keeps tracking signals, adjusting timing, choosing when to speak or hold back. From a behavioral standpoint, this happens when social interaction requires continuous calibration. Instead of flowing, the exchange is maintained. Each response carries a small cost, not heavy enough to stop participation, but constant enough to be felt. The body remains involved while the mind monitors in the background. Psychologically, this creates a split experience. One part participates, another observes. The observer checks for coherence, appropriateness, fit. This observation prevents full immersion. The interaction is followed but not inhabited. Presence is partial by default. Over time, this reinforces a quiet belief. Belonging is conditional. It requires effort, attention, and adjustment. The person may enjoy social contact, yet feel relief when it ends. Not because it was unpleasant, but because the work of aligning can finally pause. This is often when the feeling crystallizes. Not, I don't belong here, but belonging seems to demand more from me than from others. As this experience repeats, it begins to shape expectations around belonging.
The person learns, often unconsciously, to stay slightly guarded in group settings. Not withdrawn, but prepared, ready to adjust, ready to compensate. Belonging is approached carefully as something that must be maintained rather than assumed. From a psychological perspective, this guard forms as a way to prevent friction. When fitting in has required effort in the past, the system stays alert to avoid standing out. Spontaneity is reduced. Expression is filtered. The person becomes socially competent, but internally restrained. They know how to function in groups, yet rarely feel fully at ease within them. Emotionally, this creates a subtle distance. Feelings are experienced, but moderated. Humor is expressed, but softened. Opinions are shared, but cautiously. The person isn't hiding who they are pacing themselves to remain acceptable. Over time, this pacing becomes habitual. Nothing overt breaks. Relationships exist. Participation continues. But the internal signal is consistent. Fitting in requires vigilance. And when vigilance is constant, belonging starts to feel conditional. The environment feels navigable, but never fully home. This is when the question quietly changes. Not where do I belong, but who am I allowed to be in order to belong? Over time, this conditional belonging begins to shape identity. The person may start to define themselves as adaptable, observant, or different. These traits feel accurate. They explain the awareness. They justify the distance. And they make the difficulty of fitting in feel like a personal characteristic rather than a situational pattern. Psychologically, identity often forms around repeated effort. When belonging requires adjustment, the self becomes organized around managing that adjustment. The person learns how to read rooms, soften edges, and stay within acceptable range. This works, social life continues, but the cost is subtle. The sense of being fully oneself in shared spaces weakens. Behaviorally, this shows up as selective expression. Some parts are shared easily, others are held back. The person becomes skilled at presenting a version of themselves that fits, even if it doesn't fully represent what's inside. Over time, this creates a quiet dissonance, being seen but not entirely recognized. The result isn't loneliness in the obvious sense. It's a thinner form of connection. Relationships exist, but rarely feel deeply anchoring. The person is included, yet something remains slightly unresolved, a sense that fitting in required leaving parts of oneself unexpressed. And slowly, a new question forms beneath the effort. Is fitting in worth the parts that stay hidden? The most important shift happens when difficulty fitting in is no longer seen as a flaw, but as information. Not evidence of inadequacy, but a signal about context, rhythm, and compatibility. Some environments demand sameness, others allow variance.
The strain often comes not from difference itself, but from where that difference is asked to disappear. When this is recognized, belonging takes on a different meaning. It's no longer something to earn through adjustment, but something that emerges where alignment already exists. The pressure to constantly translate oneself begins to soften. Awareness replaces self-correction. Psychologically, true belonging doesn't require vigilance. It allows presence without editing. When fitting in feels effortless, the mind doesn't split between participation and monitoring. It settles. It inhabits the moment fully. Difficulty fitting in, then, becomes a clue, not about who someone is, but about where they are. There is no instruction here to withdraw or force acceptance. The shift begins with noticing when fitting in demands too much internal negotiation, when expression feels filtered by default, when presence feels conditional. It may be worth observing which spaces invite ease and which require constant adjustment. In many cases, the problem isn't the inability to belong, it's the assumption that every place should feel like home. Here, these patterns are observed calmly.